recorded. So we ask that you please keep your microphones muted during the presentation. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the meeting chat, which is going to be monitored by staff, and we can respond to some of the simple clarification type questions there during the presentation. However, if you have more involved questions or comments, if you could please save them to the end of the presentation, and then we can answer them there. The recording of this presentation and the slides will be posted to our website in the coming days, and we'll send out an email with link to the webpage once they're made available. So today's presentation will discuss the proposed conditions of the pre-draft permit with a focus on details that are new or modified from the 2014 permit. And then, as I mentioned, after the presentation, we'll open the floor for questions and comments. So with that, I'll turn it over to Lisa, who will be our presenter for today.
Great. Good morning, everyone. My name is Lisa Colleen Marie Haar, and I work as an environmental specialist in the Industrial Stormwater Permitting Unit and the Bureau of New Jersey's Stormwater Permitting, Division of Water Protection and Restoration. This presentation is for the Sand and Gravel General Permit Renewal, or RSG Permit Renewal, that was recently pre-drafted. The presentation will highlight changes and updates that the department has deemed necessary for a comprehensive renewal of the permit. So let's get started. Here's an overview of the presentation. This morning we are going to start by briefly talking about some federal background and history of the RSG permit, as well as what is regulated under the RSG. Then we'll look a little deeper into what the changes are and the requirements and how it differs from the current expired 2014 Sand and Gravel GP. And we'll have a question and answer period at the end of the presentations. So if you could hold your questions till the end, that would be greatly appreciated. First, let's get into a brief background of the regulations from both the Clean Water Act and EPA and how it shaped our industrial programs in New Jersey. Under the Federal Water Pollution Control Act of 1972, a facility with a stormwater discharge associated with industrial activity must obtain a NIPDES permit. However, EPA delegated the authority to implement the Federal Industrial Stormwater Program in New Jersey to the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection. So, the industrial stormwater permits are issued from us. As you can see, the precursor to the RSG was the R13, also known as the Mining and Quarrying GP. However, the RSG was created due to demand from facilities that only engage in sand and gravel operations. Additionally, facilities authorized under this permit do not discharge surface water, so this permit does not contain any stormwater monitoring or limits. The first RSG master permit was issued in 2014 and is being renewed this year. The RSG is one of the industry-specific general permits that our program issues, and it regulates industry for sand and gravel production. Sand and gravel production involves removing and processing various grades of rock, turning the stone into different sizes and grades. The key essential element is simple. The processed water cannot be discharged to any surface water bodies. As a result, we require various plans, including the SPPP and DCP, which we will discuss later, and implementing BMPs to manage the stormwater on site. As a result of these requirements and the limited industry regulated under this permit, limits and monitoring, again, are not required under this permit. Here are the SIC and NICS codes regulated under this permit. So now we'll discuss the changes that are being introduced to Part 2 and Part 4 of the permit. I will go into each part individually over the course of the next few slides so you're familiar with the proposed changes. Most of the changes occur in Part 4, as well as the BMPs therein. Let's talk about some new requirements in Part 2 of the permit, which are general requirements. As you can see, there are several new notifications and updated requirements that have been included. Electronic reporting and requirements for obtaining a 5G3 for new construction that isn't related to the sand and gravel activities have been rewarded to be consistent with current requirements and other new gypsies permits. Additionally, and/or rewarded requirements in Part 2 include notification for facility changes, notification of changes to the facility permit contacts, access to information, notifications of ownership, and/or permittee operator entity, eligibility, authorization, and automatic renewal of the authorization. First, let's discuss what's included in Part 4 of the permit. There are a couple of new definitions. Authorized representative means those persons whose presence is in place of the actual entity, person, or department with all rights and responsibilities under NJAC 7:14A-1.2. And bulk liquid means a liquid stored in a fixed in place above ground storage tank, include, but is not limited to, oil, petroleum products, processed wastewater, including leachate and chemicals. Next, we'll go over the terms that were included in the 2014 RSG permit, but have updated definitions in the renewal. The definition of BMP has been quite expanded from the previous permit to include a schedule of activities, prohibition of practices, maintenance procedures, and other management practices to prevent or reduce pollution of waters to the state. Containerized storm material and non-containerized source material has been updated from source materials, breaking them into two definitions. Equipment and vehicle are now split into different separate definitions. Stormwater is defined as water resulting from precipitation, including rain or snow, that runs off the land surface, is transmitted to the subsurface, or is captured by the separate storm sewers or other sewage or drainage facilities. There are also several definitions that were removed from the permit as they are no longer used in the updated requirements of the permit. So now we'll take a closer look at Part 4 narrative requirements. First, the establishment of an ISP and an ISPC. The department is introducing new requirements for developing, updating, and implementing an industrial stormwater program, also known as an ISP. The objective of the program is to implement BMPs to reduce the discharge of pollutants. The ISP shall designate a responsible party for that program, known as the Industrial Stormwater Program Coordinator, or ISPC. The role of the ISPC is to prepare and maintain a current and complete SPPP, as well as complete, sign, and submit the annual report, train employees and contractors on the site, and lastly, be the point of contact for the department. Here are the remaining Part 4 requirements, which we will discuss over the next few slides. We have updated and expanded conditions for the SP3, or Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plan, the DCP, or Drainage Control Plan, and the DCM, also known as the Drainage Control Map. After that, we'll go over the updated BMPs included in Part 4. To be clear, the permittee is already required to have an SP3 and DCP, including a map. These are updated requirements that need to be incorporated into the current SP3 and DCP. Listed here on the slide are the SP3, or Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plan requirements. In the SP3, the permittee must describe the measures necessary for compliance with all permit conditions for all stormwater discharges associated with any source materials. Inclusion of a current inventory of all source materials must be provided, in addition to thorough descriptions of all industrial activities occurring at the facility and their associated locations. The SP3 must include a drainage control plan and follow all record-keeping requirements. Note: preparation and submission of the new and updated SP3 must be done 6 months of the effective date of permit and implemented within 12 months from department approval. If there are deficiencies, the permittee must amend the SP3 within 60 days after receiving notification from the department. Lastly, the permittee shall review the SP3 at least once a year and update as often as necessary. Listed here on this slide are the Drainage Control and Drainage Control Plan, or DCP requirements. First, the permittee must establish and maintain drainage control at the facility to ensure that all stormwater associated with industrial activity remains on site and is prioritized to be used for dust control. If structural practices are needed to achieve drainage control, the permittee shall design and implement structural stormwater management BMPs in accordance with either the New Jersey Stormwater Best Management Practices Manual or propose an alternate design approved by the department. However, all BMPs shall be designed to treat all industrial stormwater facility, not only the water quality design storm. Also, the permittee shall ensure that discharges to borrow pits that have intersected the groundwater table shall only be for process area return water or incidental overland flow in the area around the borrow pits. Lastly, for drainage control, the permittee shall prevent overland flow of industrial stormwater onto adjacent properties through the use of BMPs such as berms, basins, and site grading. And all this information should be contained in the DCP. The DCP is made up of two parts: a drainage control map, DCM, which we will discuss on the next slide, and a written narrative section. The narrative section should include information such as the facility name and permit number, existing and proposed structural BMPs, basin sizing calculation, and the receiving aquifer for infiltrating stormwater management basins. Next, we'll take a closer look at the Drainage Control Map, DCM, which is part of the Drainage Control Plan. At a minimum, the DCM needs to include site boundaries, lot and block info, site topography and elevation, north directional arrow, boundary lines of each industrial activity area and source material area, current and proposed drainage area, grading with flow directions indicated, adjacent surface waters, receiving aquifers, existing structure locations, such as buildings, roads, and parking, and finally, any groundwater contamination, if present. The map should also indicate the dates for initial preparation, as well as any revisions. Next, we'll move on to discussing the BMPs, or best management practices, that are included in Part 4 of the RSG permit. The 2014 RSG permit included only these first four BMPs shown here in Part 4C, which was for specific best management practices. These BMPs were primarily focused on storage of wood chips and tree debris, salt storage, sediment transport, dust control, and the preventing the discharge of oil and grease. There were additional BMPs for fueling, vehicle maintenance, spill response, and discharge of stormwater for secondary containment, included in Attachment A of the 2014 RSG. Under the 2025 RSG, we removed Attachment A and listed all BMPs under Part 4D, along with renaming some of the BMPs that were included under the 2014 RSG permit. This was done to increase the clarity of the permit requirements and for alignment with language in our other permits. The department believes that the clarification of previously included BMPs and the addition of some of the new BMPs you see listed here will result in a more successful RSG implementation. So now we'll go into a little bit more depth on the BMPs included in Part 4D of the 2025 RSG renewal. On this slide and the following slides, each of the BMPs from Part 4 will be noted with some of the associated major requirements bulleted underneath. However, please refer to Part 4D of the permit for an extensive list of the requirements. First, there are some general requirements. This is primarily concerned with how and where source material shall be stored, as well as other general stormwater discharge requirements. Next, erosion and dust control establishes BMPs for site stabilization and dust control, such as traffic control in non-stabilized areas, entrance and exit stabilization, and reuse of collected stormwater to minimize dust and sediment transport. The requirement to sweep or clean impervious areas as frequently as necessary is also included on the erosion and dust control BMP. First, there are some general requirements. It's primary concern with how, I'm sorry, go to the next slide. First BMP on this slide is for non-containerized source material storage. This BMP is especially important as the possibility of pollutant transport by stormwater for non-containerized source material is higher than that for containerized source material. This BMP requires the source material to be stored indoors whenever practicable, and if stored outdoors, to minimize stormwater runoff by using three-sided bays, surface grading, or berms. There is also a requirement for the permittee not to store waste materials for a period longer than 6 months unless authorized by the Division of Sustainable Waste Management. The next BMP is for bulk liquid storage. When storing bulk liquids, which includes the storage in a fixed in place above ground storage tank of things like oil, petroleum products, and processed wastewaters, there must be a secondary containment area. The containment area shall be impervious and be able to contain at least 110% of the largest tank's capacity within the area. Next, when transferring bulk liquids, the permittee shall establish, maintain, and implement standard operating procedures in the SP3 to prevent exposure to stormwater during transfers. This shall include blocking stormwater inlets within the drainage area of the transfer operation, placing booms, by placing temporary berms or booms around the transfer operation, as well as placing drip pans under all hose and pipe connection. Additionally, a trained employee must be present to supervise all bulk liquid transfers. On this slide, we'll be discussing BMPs for stationary fueling operations. First, the permittee shall establish, maintain, and implement standard operating procedures in the SP3 to prevent the exposure of stormwater during stationary fueling operations and ensure that all employees that perform stationary fueling operations are properly trained. The permittee shall ensure that all stationary fueling operations are conducted on an impervious surface and under cover. All stormwater that comes in contact with stationary fueling operations shall be directed to an oil water separator. There shall be a dedicated and fully stocked spill kit within each fueling area, as well as signage posting detailing safe operation of fueling equipment. Lastly, the permittee shall conduct routine inspection and maintenance of all fueling equipment, including associated piping and pumps. The goal is to prevent the exposure of stormwater during all stationary operations. Next, we will discuss BMPs for mobile fueling operations. Similar to stationary fueling, the permittee shall establish, maintain, and implement standard operating procedures in the SP3 to prevent the exposure of stormwater during mobile fueling operation and ensure all employees that perform mobile fueling operations are properly trained. The permittee shall manage all mobile fueling by blocking any storm sewer inlets within the drainage area of the mobile fueling operations, as well as placing temporary barriers around the mobile fueling operation to contain the area. Absorbent pads shall be placed under each hose connection, and mobile fueling should not occur within 50 feet of any storm drain or surface water body, including any borrow pits that may have intersected groundwater table. Again, similar to stationary fueling, there shall be a dedicated and fully stocked spill kit on hand within each fuel delivery vehicle, as well as signage posted on the vehicle detailing safe operation of fueling equipment. Lastly, the permittee shall conduct routine inspections and maintenance of all fueling equipment. Next, the BMP is for discharge of stormwater for secondary containment. This could be areas of secondary containment around fuel fuel storage or de-icing or brine solution as an example. The important thing is the only discharge of accumulated stormwater is allowed from these areas after a visual inspection has been conducted to ensure that bulk liquids have not contaminated the stormwater. If the pollutants are not able to be seen in stormwater from a visual inspection, such as for a brine solution, there shall be a determination based on recent tank inspection and bulk liquid transfer that the stormwater is clean and does not contain any of the tank contents. If a determination cannot be made, the stormwater shall be disposed of properly as processed wastewater. Additionally, valves to the secondary containment area shall always remain closed except when discharging stormwater. Next is spill response. B&P shall be developed by the permittee to immediately address any leaks, spills, and other releases that have the potential to be exposed to stormwater. To manage a spill that has occurred, the spill should be contained through the use of temporary berms or booms, and all storm sewer inlets within the drainage area of the spill should be blocked from allowing runoff to enter. Cleanup of spills shall occur immediately upon discovery. If the spill contents are a liquid material, only dry cleaning methods with absorbent material, such as kitty litter or sawdust, may be used. All waste material from a spill response must be collected and disposed of properly. Lastly, if there is a spill or suspected release of a hazardous substance, an immediate report to the NJDEP hotline must be made, followed by site investigation if the discharge is confirmed. Next is vehicle equipment maintenance. The permittee must first and foremost properly operate and maintain all vehicles and equipment to prevent the exposure of pollutants to stormwater. During maintenance of vehicles and equipment, discharge of oil, grease, thinners, degreasers, lubricants, and contact cooling water to groundwater or surface water must be prevented. Maintenance shall be conducted indoors whenever practicable and on an impervious surface. If maintenance is conducted outdoors, it must be conducted in a designated contained area and performed on an impervious surface. Additionally, for outdoor maintenance, portable tents or covers must be placed over vehicles and equipment that is being serviced overnight and when not being worked on. A dedicated spill kit must be kept within the maintenance area. Drip pans must be used to capture any fluid leaks, and any stormwater captured within the maintenance area shall be disposed of as a processed wastewater. Next, we will go over BMPs for inoperable vehicle and equipment storage. Inoperable vehicles and equipment shall be stored within a designated area at least 50 feet from any storm drain, surface water, or borrow pits that intersect the groundwater table, and they should be covered if there is exposure of internal components or rust damage. Leaking of fluids from an operable vehicle shall be prevented by repairing the leak and or draining the fluids from the vehicle or equipment. If an inoperable vehicle or piece of equipment is discovered to be leaking, drip pans shall be implemented to immediately contain the leak. If the inoperable vehicle or equipment contain any batteries, there are certain requirements for them. Batteries shall be stored indoors. If the battery cannot be stored indoors, they shall be stored under cover and on an impervious surface. And if a battery is cracked, broken, or leaking fluid, it should be disposed of immediately and properly. Next is vehicle equipment rinsing, washing, and wastewater containment. For vehicle equipment rinsing, the use of detergents is prohibited. Rinsing is limited to removal of grit, grime, dust, dirt, and incidental road salt on external part and undercarriages only. Prior to rinsing, the bulk residue shall be removed to the maximum extent practicable using dry cleaning methods such as shoveling or sweeping. Additionally, a vehicle or piece of equipment shall not be rinsed if it was used to move or excavate hazardous or contaminated materials. For vehicle and equipment washing, which is not limited to using water only, the discharge of wastewater shall be prevented from discharging to any surface or groundwater. Washing shall be performed indoors whenever practicable, and wastewater shall be discharged to a sanitary sewer if available. If a sanitary sewer is not available, washing shall occur in a designated wastewater containment area on an impervious surface. The area shall be sectioned off with the use of booms or equivalent measures to prevent the discharge of wastewaters into surface waters, groundwaters, or stormwater sewer system. There are several requirements associated with the wastewater containment structure, including testing, inspection, and procedural requirements. Please refer to Part 4D 13D of the permit for full details. Lastly, we will be discussing the outdoor salt and other granule de-icing, anti-icing material storage and handling BMP. For outdoor salt storage, the permittee can only store salt between October 15th and April 15th and must be stored on an impervious surface that prevents stormwater run-through. Salt must also be stored in a cone-shaped pile at least 50 feet from borrow pits, surface water bodies, storm drain inlets, ditches, and other conveyance channels. Any de-icing materials that has been tracked outside of the pile shall be swept by hand or by mechanical means back into the storage pile. Loose de-icing materials shall be kept covered when not in use and at the end of the day. Lastly, practices to minimize the spillage of salt and de-icing material shall be incorporated in SP3, including using dry cleaning methods and minimizing tracking and distance the materials are transported. That brings us to the end of the presentation, and I really thank you for all your time. You can feel free to reach out to me at the email address or the telephone listed on the slide, and I just want to thank you for your time.
All right, thanks, Lisa. So something I wanted to add before we move on is to please note that we issued the pre-draft permit on May 6th and requested that any comments or factual corrections be brought to our attention within 30 days of that date, so by June 5th. And that should allow us enough time to review those and hopefully issue the draft permit and fact sheet by the end of the spring or very early summer. And that issuance of the draft permit will then be followed by a formal public comment period. Also, we ask that when you send us questions or comments, to please be as specific as possible about the permit condition or conditions in which you're referring. And if those comments are on the pre-draft permit, we will consider those when issuing the formal draft permit. So with that, we can open the floor to anyone that has any questions or comments now. There's not a large crowd here, but to do this kind of in an orderly way, if you want to speak, you can try using the raise your hand feature, which should be at the top right of your screen in the Teams window. And then we'll call on you in turn. So does anybody have any questions or comments?
Well, this is Doug Rule, and I do. And since there's, I presume you can hear me okay, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Since there's only 4 of us from industry or from the industry side on this call, I kind of think perhaps I'll kind of go through it, and Gordon, Chris, and Jake, if you guys want to kind of chime in after me or before me as we kind of methodically go through it, then I think that might be the best procedure to do it. Is this our forum right now? I don't know how long we have this meeting scheduled for. I know it being a Teams meeting, it'll cut off at some point. How long is this meeting? Because it's 10:33 now.
Sorry, go ahead, Lisa.
We have the meeting scheduled until 12.
Okay.
So there's plenty of time to discuss any comment you may have, Doug, or any
Okay.
concerns.
All right. So I'll go first. I'll kind of lead in, and I would thank the department for allowing us this opportunity to comment on the pre-draft. It's nice to kind of get back in the game. I feel like it's been a really long time since we've had these opportunities, and we've seen new permits come along. This permit, as we all know, we've seen one iteration of it from 2014 to 2019. It's been expired now for 6 years, although it's obviously been kept in place, so it's long overdue for renewal. Am I correct at just taking a look at the department's website that there are only 16 facilities in the entire state that are currently covered by this permit? Is that correct?
Anthony, do you want to handle that one? I don't know the exact number off the top of my head.
Yeah, I'm not sure the exact number off the top of my head too, but it's roughly that. It's around 20 facilities, something like that.
There's 16 listed on the department's website.
Mhm.
There's 16 listed on the department's website. Are we aware if there's any number waiting in a queue to be covered by this permit? Is the universe getting larger, or are we talking about a universe of 16 facilities here?
It's going to be a small universe that's being covered under the RSG. It actually is probably going to remain around that number because some of the mining and quarrying, the R13, are considering moving into the RSG if practicable, if they can. So we're hovering around that number right now. There's not really anyone asking us for an RSG that I'm aware of.
Okay. And I'm also presuming that some of the things that we're seeing in here are kind of the wave of the future, because we certainly have a large number of additional general permits waiting in the wings, such as the CPM and the R4, the R7. I think the R7 is currently current. So I'm presuming that some of the things that we're about to discuss will probably eventually show up in them as well. Would that be a fair assumption to make?
That would be.
Okay.
I think that, and I was just told by Gabe.
I saw it.
Okay.
I saw it, that we have one
Oh.
pending.
One pending. Okay.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'll dig in then. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of go in order of the permit until, you say either, Doug, you're going into too much detail, or we're running out of time, or however we're going to do it. Again, if Gordon, Chris, and Jake, if you want to kind of follow along with me with any comments you may have in the permit, and we'll kind of hit it like in a logical order. Should you be taking notes? So I would start with, I guess it's part 1. I hate the formatting with the different page numbers, so forgive me. We're on page 2 of 4. Yeah, this is part 1, general requirements. 8A starts with eligibility, says for facilities which conduct excavation, and it really doesn't say anything beyond just excavation. So obviously facilities covered by the RSG permit do more than just excavate material. They then process it, store it, and sell it from the facilities. So I think that's the same wording from the past. Hasn't raised any issues in the past, but since we're reopening the whole permit, it might be something you might want to flesh that out a little bit, make it a little more accurate. So rather than just saying that it is solely excavation. If we go on to B, we talk about, we introduce the term borrow pit. And, I want to make it clear to the department that the term borrow pit is kind of a colloquial term. It's not really like what you would call an official term for a mining excavation. The problem is there really is no official designation of what a mining site is. Usually a borrow pit it's kind of in common usage. That means a small operation, usually not a lot of technology there. I think in really olden days, the idea was material was borrowed and then something else was put back in its place. But I do think we need to be careful in a permit like this of interchanging words like, borrow pits that intersect the groundwater. And then we're also using things like basin in here. So I think our terminology ought to be reviewed in this permit to make sure that we've got consistency and accuracy in terms of its reflection on the industry. Much of what I'm saying is based upon my 30 plus years of experience with these types of permits in the state of New Jersey, kind of playing off of enforcement's interpretation of these permits, and them feeling like it was either unclear to them, or they felt like they were boxed into a corner by the permit and they had to enforce something that was in there that even perhaps they didn't feel was exactly correct. So I kind of view it somewhat through the eye also. I'm trying to of enforcement as well to kind of make that clear. B talks about conduct operations out of a borrow pit for the purposes of removing sand and gravel. I would again say that, people do more than just remove sand and gravel. They also process and store and sell sand and gravel. So I would mention that. I'm going to make a comment on 8E3 that talks about things that aren't eligible for the permit, but by this comment, I'm also talking about things that are eligible for coverage under this permit. This permit repetitively talks about sand and gravel generally, and I think before, Lisa, you had mentioned rock that's excavated, and then you said I think it's processed and sized. Usually, the facilities covered by the RSG permit don't really excavate rock. Except in a very limited fashion, unless it's unconsolidated gravel deposits interspersed with sand. But these facilities very commonly may bring in material from other areas as part of their, their retail operations to sell to their customer bases. So when I look at E3 and I see that the facilities that are prohibited, activities such as composting, recycling activities, or storage of materials not identified in B1A above. Come to that in a moment, B1A above. But other materials, I would say that I think we ought to kind of reconsider that scope in light of what people actually do. That might be a little too small, might be a little too narrow. I don't think the other materials in any way impact upon your goals or your vision of what this permit ought to cover. But I think very commonly you're going to find that these people bring in a small collection of bluestone or granite from North Jersey or from Northeast Pennsylvania because their customers buy it. People come in and buy it, and some of their customers are small businesses that come in and get their materials for activities in local communities from sites exactly like those covered by the RSG. So I think that kind of undefined comment of storage is not identified ought to be reconsidered. Things like stone. Also, a lot of these places sell retail materials. They might sell, landscaping hardware. They might sell shovels and wheelbarrows and landscape fabric out of a little store. They may also be selling salt, and salt is not really specifically identified in the eligibility. Yet we spent an awful lot of time in this permit talking about the storage of salt. So that to me is kind of contradictory, and I think it ought to be reevaluated and cleaned up. Does anybody have a comment from our side at this point of the eligibility section?
Yeah, I do, Doug. I'm Gordon Milnes. I'm with Clayton Sand Company. And Doug, those are good comments. I would just agree that there are times when broken stone, gravel, is sometimes brought onto a site. Most of the sand miners operate other businesses, whether it's concrete production or asphalt or whatever. And in those operations, there's a need to order stone for that use. And sometimes these sand mines are used to just temporarily store that material. It's not processed there. It's just a storage. It's a natural product, and it's put down on the ground and shipped back out again normally to our own facilities. It happens just has a lot to do with just the sequence of bringing material in to our sites from other locations and sometimes needing a spot to temporarily store them. So some quantity of aggregate, should be allowed just to facilitate that operation. With regard to composting, I just don't know why it's in the regulations more than once as not being allowed. I don't know what impact that would have to the groundwater quality. I'll give you an example of what happens on one of our sites. We'll get a request from Princeton University for a certain quality of topsoil. We in the past have made that topsoil from not us, but we have a vendor come in and do it specifically for a job. It uses our sand that's on the site and mixes in some compost material and some peat moss to make a high grade material for a high grade use. And under the regulations, that wouldn't be allowed. I just don't understand why. We are not storing. We typically, and I'll speak for all the sand miners, are the last thing we want to get into the ponds that we mine from is wood or leaves or branches or anything like that. We always store those away from that because we're, hydraulically mining the sand from those areas and we don't want organics in them. So it's typically done in an area isolated from that and just over not a non-impervious surface. So yeah, so I just wanted to ask about the composting thing and also the stone and gravel, if there's some way to make some provision for that.
Yeah, I had a follow-up comment which kind of dovetails with that, and perhaps you can kind of answer everything at once. Is that I did have a situation where I had a facility that was covered by the R13, which was denied extended coverage under the R13 because they had concrete Jersey barriers. I think everybody on this call knows what a Jersey barrier is because I guarantee every one of us drives by them daily. These Jersey barriers were used on a large project. In fact, it was either 295 or the Turnpike. They probably sat out there literally for years. They were made of solid concrete, the same material that probably is what was used to build the DEP's building. We used to follow, there was a source material guidance document that the department generated that we used to follow that said basically if a material doesn't generate pollutants, it's not considered a source material. So perhaps that definition ought to be reevaluated in light of materials that might be stored on a site following the department's source material guidance document that are not realistically capable of generating source materials to stormwater. Maybe they might be allowable too, because some of these people, as Gordon said, have some other activities. There are people who are in the the sand and gravel mining operation. This is one of their sites, but they also may do road contracting. That was exactly the case at this thing, and they stored Jersey barriers there, and it just seems so unnecessarily cumbersome on everybody on this call to exclude somebody from coverage under a permit that meets their needs because they had a material that by the department's source material guidance document wouldn't have been covered as source material. It just, to me, that defied. I couldn't figure it out, but we were told that's the way it is. You got to do it, so we did it. I think this is a golden opportunity to kind of open that door a bit again and kind of peer in and kind of reevaluate the other materials that are stored at these facilities. And I'll also tell you, these really narrow distinctions in what's allowed and what's not allowed may be one of the reasons why we're talking about a very small universe of covered materials, because there's an awful lot of facilities out there that could be otherwise covered by this, that we're squeezing them into such a tight window here that they're either going RSG or excuse me, they're either going R13 or they're having to file individual permit applications, which we haven't seen any of them issued. So it seems like we ought to get more people in this permit by kind of, I don't say increasing the scope because that sounds like let anybody in, but I think at least increasing the scope in a rational manner that we all find acceptable, and I do include the DEP there. Chris, did you have a comment about this section real quick? You're muted, Chris. Chris, if you're muted, we cannot hear you. So
yeah, we can't hear you.
Okay. Try one more time, and if not, I know what your comment is because you and I discussed it. I can't hear you. All right, Chris's comment is throughout this permit, he noted a few instances where references were incorrect, and this is the first one, where it says the storage of materials not identified above in B1A. B1A does not reference the materials that are covered eligibility, so that reference is incorrect. So I would ask the department before this thing goes live as a draft is to double check all references. By the way, while I'm there, I have a comment down below that, which is kind of in the same basket. I would suggest the department maybe not include in a permit website, URL references to the department's website. I personally have found that those references over time have become very unreliable. And the number of times we've been directed in some manner to a URL that we get a 404 error and then we're just back thrown to the wolves. And now we've got to navigate our way through the world of the DEP's website, which is a wonderful experience. I would say be careful doing that. I know a few places in this permit, you didn't give specific URLs. You gave a little more generalized URLs. I would just suggest you be careful about giving real specific URLs, lest we find in 3, 4, 5 years that they're no longer functioning. I'm sorry. I think it might have been Anthony. You were starting to respond to that collective of comments, and I kind of jumped in. So if anyone has a comment or comments.
I just had a follow-up question, actually, when we were discussing the composting. So, you know, I know that there's only 4 members from the industry, and so maybe it doesn't represent, you know, the entirety of the universe. But in terms of composting, so when you're doing the soil blending on site with compost, is that compost produced on site, or is that brought in already a finished product, and just the blending is performed on sites?
That'll be typically brought in.
Okay. Right.
Mhm.
And I think, Anthony, that was a good call. And that was a good distinction you just made, because what Gordon described is not pursuant to the recycling permitting group's definition of what would be composting. That would be blending more. That's like soil blending more than anything else, which is a not uncommon practice in the aggregates industry at all. You know, I think for the sake of everybody on this call, we need to realize that the materials made here are a highly technical material, and like sand isn't sand, gravel's not gravel, stone's not stone. There's a myriad of uses. There's a myriad of specifications. It has become a highly technical business. And so the material that Princeton University called for, I know nothing about the project, Gordon, obviously, but they called for a very, very technically oriented, high specification product that, you know, it's just can't go like, oh, we dug up some topsoil, here you go. It doesn't work like that. So it's a very methodical, engineered business, if you will. And you have excluded recycling, which theoretically in the state of New Jersey, compost is recycling. So to include the word composting there is slightly redundant, but it's not worth removing. I think we all understand it, what you're saying there. Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, I had one other item in that
Yep.
section.
Yep.
We're still in section 8, eligibility, EI, Romanet I. New facilities that discharge the groundwater in areas classified under those sections would not be eligible for the permit. I'm not sure why. You know, new facilities after 2013, that's basically the Class 1A and Class 1 PL. I think those are Pinelands areas. And you know, the Pinelands would have jurisdiction over those uses. And if a new facility, or let's say an expansion of an existing facility, were to happen, I don't see any reason why it would be precluded to be able to operate under this permit, as long as it's following the permit. You know, I think that's the goal, to get sand miners to, you know, have a general permit to work within.
So, all right, are you okay if we can
Okay.
try? I'm not sure I'm going to remember everything that you brought up, but we'll try to go back through and cover them. But I think, so I wasn't part of the stormwater group back when the RSG was that these facilities were taken out of the R13 world, and this permit was created. But this permit is one of the least onerous permits that we have in the stormwater program, as long as, the operations are conducted in the borrow pit, the water is returned to the borrow pit, there's no discharge to surface water, there's no pollutants being introduced into the borrow pits. And that's the reason why this permit has no effluent limits or monitoring requirements. The process, I'm guessing back, in the 2000 teens, was evaluated, and this was a subgroup that the department felt comfortable enough with, that there wasn't any need for effluent monitoring as long as the operation stayed within these bounds. There may be an opportunity to allow some additional activities, but not every activity that may be happening. So they would all have to be evaluated. We don't have that information about what all the permitted facilities, what extra activities are being conducted, but I think it would be helpful if you provided that information to us so that we can go through some of that. Some of the materials, I understand what you're saying about the Jersey barriers. That may or may not be something we could look into, but I think there is also a concern about how they're being stored and what state of disrepair they may or may not be in. So, and that maybe there's something that we can do that makes sense there, but we'll have to go back through and, evaluate where we were with the other facilities. If somebody, let's say one of sand and gravel facilities that are currently under this permit wanted to start or has already started an activity that could produce a stormwater runoff that would be conveying pollutants into the groundwater. So remembering that there is no surface water discharge allowed, that there may be a need or that we want to have monitoring on that discharge to make sure that it's not creating a problem in the groundwater. So I can't say that, wanting to have the general permit to accommodate these operations was certainly, the department's intent, but also it has to be operations that we feel comfortable don't need to have monitoring requirements imposed. So, and that's why if there's whatever the activity is, we will evaluate each of them.
Mhm.
And if we believe that we need monitoring to verify, over time that there's no impact on the groundwater, that could be something that we would determine would be eligible under this permit. But if not, then it would fall under either an R13, another permit, or other general permit, or an individual permit. And I understand what you're saying about the backlog, and that is something that we're trying to get a hold of, which is why we started here with the RSG permit, and we are starting to make progress. It's not going to happen all at once. It's going to be, sort of slow to get started, but our intent is to start to work on all of these other renewals and get all of them out so that we're operating under current permit requirements.
And Nancy, there were two individuals on this call who were there from before the R13, and that's Gordon and I, and we were part of that effort. And we were part of the effort that developed the R13 as well, excuse me, the RSG. But we were there with the development of the R13, so we know a lot of the history and the background of this. But I would also say this permit's been in place since 2014, and I know these facilities are getting inspected. And are you hearing from your inspectors that they're going out and going, oh, there's all these activities and materials that we see that are causing us concern? Because we're not hearing that. It's, like nobody went to that Jersey barrier site and said, oh no, there's Jersey barriers.
So I don't want to get into enforcement. What sometimes we hear from certain inspectors, sometimes we don't. So, and I couldn't tell you for these, maybe 12 facilities that we're talking about right now. I don't know specifically if those issues have been raised, but it certainly depends on timing and the inspector and, their understanding of the permit requirements. So,
well, whatever we can do to help the department reevaluate the eligibility criteria, we are more than happy and to do so. I have said a million times that we would be happy to take anybody on this call out to a site or sites to walk around and spend the whole day talking about what this kind of facility does and what it does not do. I'm sure, and you have the capability of going onto any RSG facility at present we could meet you out there and we can kind of talk about what's out there. So.
Sure. And
if I could just jump in, my apologies. I didn't realize this was going to go so long. I have an 11 I have to get on. I have some more comments. Is it okay if I forward them to you in an email? I think there's zero reference.
Absolutely.
Okay. RSVP. Let's see. How do I do that? Just
right in the cover
Okay.
letter of the pre-draft, there's an industrial stormwater permitting at dep.nj.gov mailbox.
Right.
And so you can just use that mailbox and send them. That way they're available, to all of us. You'll get
Great.
we'll try to make sure that, we confirm that we received your email, but as specific as you can be about the part of the permit that you're talking about.
Yeah.
And I know you've mentioned, that there's other materials that might be stored on the site, but if any of the comments that you're submitting, please be as specific as possible, because we can't deal with generalities. We need to be specific. So
Certainly.
Understood.
Yeah. No problem.
and if we need
like
follow-up conversations,
Yeah.
please,
Reach out. Yeah.
reach out.
Like Doug said, I mean, it's a limited amount of material that would be on that list. But thank you very much. Appreciate all your time, and this is great. Like Doug said initially, it's nice to be involved early on. So thank you, and I'm sorry I have to run.
Thank you, Gordon.
See
It's
you.
okay.
Bye now.
Thank
Bye,
you.
guys.
Okay, I'm going to pick it up since Gordon's left and Chris is muted. I'm going to Jake is still on the call from the Sylvia organization. I'm going to kind of pick up the pace a little bit. I too will give you comments in writing to the pre-draft. I think that might keep us a shorter time frame here today. Page 3 of 18, the stormwater definition. Just a matter of curiosity, you said that it changed. Has that definition has changed in the regulations? 714A 1.2. Has that definition changed? Because I thought I heard that in the slides.
I don't think just how that we've incorporated it possibly into the permit, and that it's how it's incorporated into the permit has changed. So there was a lot of not just change over the requirement, there was maybe more so rewording and clarification of requirements.
Gotcha.
And that requires a more, a finer read compared.
It's fine. I thought I heard the comment made that the definition of stormwater changed, and I just was curious to know how it had changed, but not.
Yeah, we haven't changed that.
Yeah. Okay. Move on. So I'm on page 4 of 18, A1. I'll leave it at that. I am not at all adverse to the concept of an industrial stormwater program. I think I understand your intent, and I support your intent. I like it. But I feel that the way this is, and I'm presuming this is the type of thing we will see in future general permits, and I understand that. Now I'm not against it, but I do think your explanation of what is intended by the phrase industrial stormwater program is a little vague. In your first sentence, you said you have to implement one, and then your second sentence you have to say what's the purpose of it. And that's all fine, but I think you ought to kind of make it a little clearer what your vision of what this program entails, so that this isn't, well, this is what I think it is versus what you think it is. You're very prescriptive in your permits in general, sometimes, in my opinion, a little too much. But here, I think you're a little too open-ended. I think it's a little too subjective for this first rollout of a new concept. That would be my comment with regards to that.
Well, Doug, can you share some specific language with us that you're looking for?
Well, I was kind of, like we'll do in our business, we'll do like environmental management systems for company, and they're very kind of prescriptive, usually, like if you're following ISO guidelines or something like that, and they're usually like A, B, C, and D. And I realize you kind of laid it out here, but I don't know. I mean, I feel like if you mean if your program is a SWIP, a DCP, and then an IPSC or whatever it is, and that's it, well, that's fine. It might be helpful if you just said a program is comprised of these 3 parts. Make it very black and white, because otherwise, I kind of read through this. I said, I think I'm in support of this, but I'm not really understanding what you're asking for here, this new concept. So I think I'm in support of what you're going here for, but I'm just not real sure. And I feel like it might get to be the point where I might be in the position going to a site where I'm with an inspector going, no, we do have a program, and them saying, no, you don't have a program. And it's like he said, she said kind of thing. And I think a little clarification here would be useful for all of our purposes. I think I understand what you're looking for here. I just think that moving down the road, as again, what I presume is going to be a requirement of all the general permits moving forward, I think that this concept, just a little more meat on the bone, might be helpful. But that's really all I have to say about that.
All right. Well, if anything comes to you and you have suggestions, let us know, but we'll try
Okay.
and take a look at it.
Okay. Then I go to page 5 of 18 under drainage control, C1, drainage control requirements. You kind of slightly threw me in the slides because when I did my review of this permit, I did not stop on this point. But if I go to C1B, where it's got, we'll implement BMPs, including modifications in accordance with the BMP manual, or propose an alternative design and review, I'm frankly not quite sure what you're getting at here. Like,
We will clarify that. Yes.
Okay, because I want to make it clear. The facilities that are covered by this permit are one big giant hole in the ground, and have been one big giant hole in the ground since way before this permit came along. Usually all runoff at those sites drains into the hole. There's literally almost nothing out there that has ever been designed in accordance with the BMP manual or an alternate design. And now you're talking about, like, in IBI, that the permittee shall ensure that all flow is directed along the longest axis of the basin. And I'm like, whoa, wait a second. These are humongous holes in the ground that have been there for 50 years. I think back when Gordon and I were talking to the department at this concept was brought out as, like, what I'm going to call structural stormwater basins, not like the mining pond.
Right.
And so, yeah, and I think we're on the same page. I think that could be clarified in there. In C, you use borrow pits. I talked about that before. In number 2, drainage control plan, you dropped a major bombshell, and I think you kind of soft sold it in the whole thing. And the major bombshell is that the drainage control plan has to be certified by an LS, or it has to be certified by a P, and it has to have elevations measured by a PE. That will add time and money onto these facilities. I am sure that this is going to be a requirement of all future general permits, but this one of all general permits, I would kind of question the need for that, since we all, unless you've experienced through your, since 2014, an overwhelming amount of people having runoff going in every which direction. Unless it's the case, I feel like this is an awful lot of effort to show very little result. And I would ask that this requirement be reconsidered, at least in the case of the RSG permit. I would also note that your comment that they'd have elevations measured by an LS is, I just think you probably ought to, like, think of that a little bit, because you probably should put some sort of a time frame on it, which you didn't, which kind of surprises me. I mean, would it be okay if the measurements came from 1925? Probably not. And so when we started looking at this for a facility, because it's currently, that same requirement is currently in an individual permit. We're dealing with it on the individual permit side. That became a question in our mind, because now we're talking to PEs and LSs who are saying, well, I'm not going to certify something that's like 30 years old. So I kind of was surprised that you just, like, threw it out there that it's got to be measurements from an LS. But I do think in the collective, I think that places a heavy lift for some of these facilities, particularly from some of the smaller ones. And once this permit gets rolled out, you've asked that this be done within 6 months. which, nowadays people don't go out with a rod in transit. They fly sites, which means you got to get on busy schedules. That stuff's got to get processed in a computer. Plans have got to be done. I just feel like this is a lot for this permit. So I kind of throw it out there. In E5, it's got the requirement for sizing calculations for any stormwater management basins. Again, given the fact that all of the stormwater runs into the mining pond at the site, I think you ought to make it clear that that's not what you're talking about, that you're talking about specifically designed stormwater management bases for some other purpose. Like, for example, in my mind's eye, I'm aware of one site where this all drains into the pond, but they had to build, to meet municipal standards, a small stormwater basin up the front of their site for like their office area drainage, I'll call it. That's the kind of thing that we originally discussed with the department back in 2013. I think that's what you mean when you talk about sizing calculations. I don't think you mean sizing calculations for these usually very, 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 very large mining ponds. So I think you might want to adjust that as well. I do note in section 200 drainage control plan, you removed the minimum scale. It kind of surprised me a little bit, because I don't think you want to get plans that are 8.5 by 11 or look at 8.5 by. Now, I don't know if your intent was that, well, we're going to get everything electronically and we can blow it up, which is the way the world works now. But I was just surprised you removed that. I make that comment. I'm moving along a little bit quick here. Under D, which is BMP's D2 for erosion and dust control. A4, you've got the requirement there that the reuse of collected stormwater to minimize dust and transport of particulars and sediment. I'm kind of curious, is like, why do you care where the water comes from? A lot of these sites supplement their water that they use from wells. They have water allocation permits, very common. They might say our mining pond is small enough that our water in there doesn't settle. Usually the reason for a mining pond is twofold, actually, or threefold. It's a source of water for the processing equipment. It becomes the home for the return water so that natural settling can occur. And it's also where the excavation occurs. So in some cases, they might go, the water that we pull we don't want to use it for dust control. And the source of that water is both groundwater and stormwater. It can't be separated. So it's kind of, I think that's going to become an infeasible requirement. I think it's a good intent. We should be using collected stormwater. I just think in this sort of a setting, I think it will be difficult to I think it'll be difficult to enforce, and it'll be difficult to prove that we are doing that. So I kind of question the need for that. Going on to number 14, non-containerized source material storage. I'm kind of mystified what you're talking about here. And I would really suggest you give some form of an example of what you mean. Because certainly, I mean, I'm kind of assuming the things that we would not containerize the most would be things like aggregate stockpiles. And you say right there, it does not apply to storage of sand, gravel, or wood materials. Check your check your links. But other than that, it's got, we're going to store everything indoors as much as possible. I'm just kind of curious as to what you envision this section to include. And then you have in C5 that the area in front of storage bays and adjacent to storage areas shall be swept clean every day after loading and unloading. When you got to consider, a lot of these areas are going to be unpaved. They're completely incapable of being swept. I think this section, I frankly, I wasn't quite sure what you were even going after here. I think you need some clarification, some further elaboration on like what is your intent, and then reevaluate your requirements in light of that, and it'll give us a better shot at it as well. Number 5, bulk liquid storage. I would say that, this permit starts to kind of tread onto, I presume everybody on this call knows what a federally required SPCC plan is. It kind of starts to like tread onto some of that area. And, like the federal SPCC regulations no longer are for 110%. That's like old school and they don't use it anymore. They've kind of modernized since there. But for the department to say all stormwater shall be removed from containment areas promptly after storm events to ensure that the capacity is available in the event of a tank failure, I would be cautious about making a statement like that in a permit, as if to appear that you are leading a permittee in a direction that might contradict federal SPCC requirements. I mean, I think you might want to revisit that statement and say, like, after appropriate checks have been made and in accordance with all applicable regulations or something like that. Because you really can't just open the valve and let it drain out under the federal regulations. So I do think, you might want to cross-reference there a bit. Number 7, stationary
Well,
fueling.
Can
Go
I
ahead, I'm
stop
sorry.
you for a second, Doug? I'm
Sure.
sorry. I don't think we have time to have discussion about every point,
No.
but I wanted to just point out that there is another section in the permit that does talk about discharging from secondary containment, and that you have to check that. So there is a connection. It's not just open the valve every time, or else there'd be no point in the secondary containment. So
I know.
there is a link. If that is not there,
I got it.
we
I'm
will
coming
do
to-
that.
I'm coming to it. I'm coming to that section. So section 7C2, which requires that stationary fueling operations be under the cover of a solid canopy roof or similar structure. Number one, I think that's a heavy lift. That's a lot to ask for people who might have a very small fuel tank that they've got to build a covered area over it. Number one. Number two, I would advise you that in some areas, fire codes do not allow covers to be built over fueling areas, because firemen theoretically want to be able to spray down on burning fuel tanks and the like. So I wrote if allowable there. I do note here in 7E that you mentioned a spill kit. Use the phrasing within each fueling area, which makes sense to me, and I'm with you on that. In number 8, which is mobile fueling areas, in F, you are now requiring that the spill kit be within each vehicle, which I guess I kind of understand what you're getting at, but realize that they are often contractors' vehicles. And so that's going to require, mandating contractor requirements, which I have found industries are kind of hesitant to do. I just throw that out there. I'm not saying that ought to be reevaluated or removed. I'm just saying that might prove problematic down the road. 9, which is the discharge from secondary containment. I get it all there. I'm with you. Number 3 kind of threw me a little bit, or item 3, 9A3, if the permittee cannot determine the stormwater is uncontaminated, in the slides you use the word clean. I would probably avoid using the word clean, but if it's uncontaminated, then the stormwater shall be disposed of properly as processed wastewater. I think that's a slightly loaded statement right there, because some of that, depending upon what got spilled into the water, might be hazardous waste. I think you want to be careful with your terminology here. I think just saying it's processed wastewater, which theoretically some people have permits to discharge processed wastewater, such as on the R13 side. I don't think that's phrasing that we ought to carry forward into future permits. I think that's a slightly dangerous phrasing. Number 11, vehicle equipment maintenance. Both C and D start off with the same wording. And in the slide that was presented that was appropriate to C, different wording was used. So I believe C is a flat out error. I think that the wording in 11C is incorrect, because it is the same as 11D, and that was different than your slides. I'm just pointing that out right now. You also mentioned on the slides, you specifically said tents or covers in the slide. I don't see that in here. If you can point me to that, I'd like to know where it is. I didn't see that.
I'm not going to find it right this second. I don't know
That's
if we
fine.
use the word tent in the permit, but that it would be, let me see. I'm just trying to read it quickly so we can speed along.
We're on 11, right?
Yes,
Vehicle
we're on.
equipment
Yeah, it's actually
maintenance.
letter
Yeah,
H.
Or no, I. Letter I.
No, I. Yeah, letter I.
Yeah.
Very end.
Oh, I'm sorry. There it is. It's hiding there. Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. That's my mistake, and I appreciate the correction. Okay. I
We
think
did use
that
the
was,
word tense.
yeah, it did use the word tense. It just kind of caught me because I didn't remember it there. I don't recall if that was in the prior permit. It may have been, because I know we kind of squawked about it before and said nobody's probably going to be using tense, but I don't remember how that happened. 12A2, that it should be covered if there's rust damage. You're probably going to find rust damage on a lot of old junky equipment. I don't know how much people are going to be thrilled to have to cover a lot of old equipment on the site. I just throw that out there. I don't know if that's really a feasible requirement or not.
Well, I was
just
just
throw it
going to
out there.
say, this is only for like inoperable, not just rusty spots.
No, I realize that.
Okay.
But people do keep, for example, people will keep inoperable equipment that they take parts from, which is a good practice that we ought to support. And so, to go like, oh, just get rid of it then. People are going to go,
Well, I don't think
no,
we're saying.
No, I
Right.
understand. I understand what you're saying. You're saying cover it. I don't own a site, one of these sites. I don't know how I would feel about it. I just think people are going to go like, what? I'm just throwing that out there. I'm not saying remove it. I'm just saying that might cause a hiccup down the road. Just so that we're all on, so it's noted. Number 13 is vehicle equipment rinsing, washing, and wastewater containment. So 13A, you kind of lead off strong here by saying that, like, really the only vehicle and equipment rinsing that you should be doing is the removal of grit, grime, dust, and dirt, and incidental road salt, which only happen during the winter. And you can only use water, and it's got to go into the mining pond. Okay. You can't have touched hazardous or contaminated materials. So in 4, we say rinse water from activities listed above shall not be diverted to any borrow pit that has intercepted the groundwater table or cause a discharge to surface water. If it's clean water that contains only dirt from the equipment, like sand or whatever, that is exactly what's going into the mining pond. So to say, oh, it can't go into the mining pond, I'm not following the connection there. I don't really therefore know where you envision it will go. I can tell you people will take like an excavator and rinse off, built on sand after time. They'll do it in proximity to the mining pond. It goes in there. It is the same type of water, slurry, I'll call it, going into the mining pond that comes off the sand plant. It's exactly the same. So to say, well, you can only wash it, it's got to be clean, but that type can't go into the pond. I don't know where you're envisioning it's going to go, frankly. So I'm kind of like 13A. I'm already like, whoa, my head's spinning a little bit. Then 13B, you suddenly pop in the phrase wash wastewaters, which you didn't define what you meant by that. But I think in the slides, you kind of alluded to the fact that you thought that was going to be something other than just clean water, like it was going to contain a detergent or something, which is fine. But if that's the case, you might want to kind of define what you're talking about there. That stuff's got to be done indoors wherever possible. And you are encouraging people to discharge that to a sanitary sewer. I'm kind of frankly surprised the DEP is encouraging people to discharge processed wastewaters to sanitary sewers. It seems a little counterintuitive in today's world, but that's kind of your business. And then you talk about all the things about where this wash wastewater can't go. It's got to be done on an impervious surface. We've got to vacuum it up. And then you have this really long section that essentially, if I'm reading this correctly, provides standards for underground storage tanks. So it's almost like you're kind of telling people, take this, it certainly can't go into the pond. Then I understand that if your intent is that it contains like a detergent or something, it's got to be done impervious and put it in an underground storage tank, which again is kind of not what I would anticipate that we ought to encourage people to do. But in lieu of other standards, I kind of guess. I don't know. I I read this and I was not overly comfortable with this section. I mean, I thought it kind of should get a little reevaluation and a little bit of rethinking there. Going on to 14, outdoor salt. The permittee shall only store de-icing materials temporarily between the 15th of October and April 15th. I would tell you that there's a fair number of aggregate facilities that sell salt, and sometimes salt is hard to come by during the season. You're restricting them to storing it only during the season. Every DOT facility you drive by stores salt all year long because they're prepping for the season. They don't start storing it then. They prep for the season because that's when you can get it, and that's also when you can get it at a better price. So I don't know if that's a tough requirement for them to meet or not. But I
think we're saying outdoor storage, a pile in the yard. If it's going to be stored permanently outside that time frame, it needs to be in a permanent structure.
Okay.
Like a DOT barn kind of.
That's fine. Then I think that should be clarified in here, because otherwise, if that sentence just said you can't store it during that time frame. So that's a perfectly acceptable answer, and I think you want to do that. I don't really understand your intent of specifically specifying that it has to be in a cone-shaped pile. I'm like, what? And certainly that does not happen in DOT storage barns. They don't have it in cone-shaped piles. And so if they had it, for example, in a concrete bin blocked area with a tarp, it might not be in a cone. I don't know what your rationale. I mean, maybe it's something about salt storage piles that I'm unaware of. But why you're specifically asking for a cone-shaped pile, I don't.
If it's outdoors, it's just to limit the surface area for the runoff. So not to have it spread out in a long windrow kind of setup, or
okay.
And it's easier, smaller contained areas so that it's easier to cover as well.
Okay. Again, I have no frame of reference for that. I don't store salt, and no one has ever in my professional career ever said that there was any problems with salt storage, whether it was a regulator or a thing. So I completely take your word for that. I've never heard that. It kind of caught me right there as kind of being an odd requirement, but I understand what you're saying. I'm getting to the end. Section F, employee training. F1AI. This says that the permittee shall ensure that employees are properly trained on job duties prior to the commencement of the employee performing those duties. That does not seem like the DEP's business, and certainly not within the context of a stormwater general permit. I mean, that could be extended to say, like, there is a new office assistant who has certain job duties.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it's like that. I don't know what you're getting at there, but you got to reword that. That's not good.
Stormwater. We can add some stormwater related.
I know what you're getting at. You just need to clarify that. Number 5 under there, the permittee shall keep records, including sign-in sheets. There's lots of people who stopped using sign-in sheets a long time ago and use electronic means. I think you mean that. But I am aware that many inspectors come to the site and say, we're not looking at anything electric. We want to see paper. As hard as that is to believe in this day and age, I would encourage the department to kind of move away from encouraging paper. So I think sign-in sheets, you could just clarify that by saying, or other suitable means or something like that. That would make that fine. And that's all I had. Now, I may have sounded like I'm coming down hard on it. I'm not. What I'm viewing this thing as the first shot of the new generation of general permits that I have a very vested interest in, because we represent a lot of facilities under general permits. And so, I mean, some of the things I would anticipate that we will collectively be saying again about the CPM and the R4 and et cetera, moving down the road. So maybe if we can address some of these things now with the RSG, maybe we can all make sure we're on the same page and we've got any questions squared away. So I would, again, I'm going to finish by saying I'm very happy to be able to have this opportunity. I'm very grateful to the department for allowing us to have this opportunity. You may remember that the entry point, or this actually may predate most of you, but the entry point for this type of discussion was usually through an organization called the New Jersey Concrete and Aggregate Association, which is the industry trade association that covered the mining industry. That association has essentially discontinued operations and is reformulated as the New Jersey Construction Materials Association, of which I am a member of the environmental group. So I will relay, you know, kind of what's going on here to them. I'll give them a report, and I'll keep the industry involved and engaged with this. I do think the small universe of permittees kind of slightly works against it. I mean, a lot of people, frankly, aren't that interested because there are 13s or something else. But I do think that this is, again, I would think that this is the start of a going down a road towards the reissuance of general permits, and I appreciate that from the department's aspect. And I think, Nancy, it was you who said that we've got many more coming and stuff like that. And I'm like, great, bring them on. We are happy to see him come. We're happy to help. It's been disconcerting that we've got general permits that have lingered for so long, longer than the permit coverage itself. So
Hey, Doug.
I'm glad to see this. Yes, sir.
Hey, Doug, as long as you mentioned us, I'm Kevin Monaco,
Oh, there
Executive
you are.
Director
I
of
didn't know you're on, Kevin.
New Jersey. Yes, I've been on the whole meeting. So New Jersey Construction Materials Association, recently established about 1.5 years ago, comprised of many of the successor companies from the old Concrete and Aggregate Association, Clayton, Sylvie, Weldon, Brain, Vulcan Materials, Tilcon, names like that. I also manage the New Jersey Asphalt Pavement Association. So as the Construction Materials Association kind of gets up and running and gets our arms around some of these issues, we do plan to engage in a more formal process with the DEP and other agencies, once we kind of develop our own internal policy positions. But I appreciate being invited to the meeting, and I'm learning a lot about this side of the industry. So thank you.
Appreciate it. Yeah. So when you respond to us, if you can drop a link or like email contact for those organizations, that helps us keep you in our emailing outreach list.
Sure.
When we have issues.
I emailed my RSVP to this meeting, which includes my email signature. Is that adequate? Somebody on the call, I think, should have that. I think Eric,
Yep.
I think you responded to me.
Great.
Yeah, we'll make a note of it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Terrific. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you. So yeah, I think, we'll take all the comments that we get. Some of them we will be able to accommodate, some we won't. But
Sure.
if you can be as specific as, just what we were saying, you don't think this is clear enough, if you can go the next step and provide suggested language to give us like an understanding of what direction you're going in, and maybe we'll use your language, maybe we'll make some other adjustments, but it helps as opposed to just saying, please clarify. We're not quite sure what you always mean about what isn't clear.
Understood.
We write it every day. You haven't, we've been working on it, so it's perfectly clear to us.
Yeah,
So sometimes we're not.
I know how that goes. You stare at it
So-
long enough, and it's like it makes perfect sense to you, and somebody else looks at it immediately and
Right.
goes, I don't know what you meant. I get that.
So
I'll
if you
do
can
that.
provide suggested edits, and so that at least gives us a direction for what clarification you need, that would be very helpful.
Will do.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Doug. I appreciate the comments, and we'll be addressing them shortly, obviously after you're done. But
Okay.
yeah.
And you said that was the date you want them by June 5th.
Yeah. And when we sent the pre-draft out, there was language
Yeah.
in the cover letter that basically gave a 30-day
Yeah, I probably did.
informal pre-draft period. I don't know if the date was specifically in the cover letter, but I think it said 30 days.
I'll put something together and get it over to you by then.
Great.
Thank you.
Sounds
Much
good.
appreciated.
Well,
I
thank
personally have nothing else. If anybody else does,
I don't
Okay,
have
and if
anything specific. I did want to thank Doug for his comments and the DEP for hosting this Q&A. I appreciate the introduction to the draft. Doug, you mentioned a lot more than I would have, but I did want to just kind of highlight his one point about the stationary fueling. That is going to be a big lift based on if it's even allowed with fire code. So I would like to second that, or however that process goes, but that is something that is going to require capital and planning and it be a process. So
Right. Yeah, definitely. We'll address that. I appreciate your comment. And I guess if there isn't any more questions or comments, we can kind of wrap up.
All right, well, thank you, folks.
Thank you
so
for
much, Doug.
joining and taking
you.
time.
thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, bye-bye.
It's
Bye.
very helpful. Thanks.